I never thought a broken espresso machine could make me notice someone the way I noticed her. It was just another late afternoon at the corner bookstore where I worked, the fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above the stacks of novels and magazines. Dust motes floated in the air like tiny suspended stars, and the smell of coffee from the cafe counter mixed with the old paper scent of the shop. That's when she walked in, tall, poised, the kind of presence that makes you feel like you've been standing in shadow your whole life. She had that effortless confidence older women seem to carry, the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are, but not needing anyone else to notice it. She moved slowly past the shelves, fingers brushing over spines as if she could read the stories just by touch. And then she paused at the small espresso machine sitting on the counter, my machine, and currently my responsibility. It had jammed again, leaking bitter steam across the tray. I was crouched behind the counter, tightening a screw, trying not to curse under my breath. "Need a hand?" she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was warm, edged with amusement. I looked up. Our eyes met, and for the briefest moment, I felt a jolt, like static electricity. I had no idea what it was, and I probably blushed, because I cleared my throat and gestured vaguely toward the mess. I think I've got it," I muttered. She didn't move, just watched me. Her expression was curious, patient, and somehow teasing all at once. She tilted her head slightly, and my brain froze on the movement, on the way her hair caught the light, on the subtle tension in her shoulders. There was something in the way she stood there, unhurried, that made every second feel too long and not nearly long enough. I twisted the knob again, trying not to notice how close she had leaned over the counter. Steam curled around her face, making her eyes look sharper somehow, like they had a story they didn't feel like telling yet. "Here, try this," she said suddenly, reaching for the screw I'd been struggling with. Her hands were steady, confident, and for some reason I felt like I was intruding into a world I wasn't supposed to enter. She didn't hover or boss me. She just existed beside me, guiding without touching, speaking without insisting. And then it worked. The machine hissed and spat a small stream of espresso into the cup. She smiled, a brief, knowing smile, the kind that hides more than it shows. And in that smile, God, in that smile, was something I couldn't name. Something that made me realize I had been watching her every move, aware of every flicker of expression, every casual gesture, and it felt unfair and thrilling all at once. She stepped back then, still smiling faintly, and said, "Coffee saves more than mornings sometimes, doesn't it?" I laughed nervously, but I couldn't stop noticing the way she lingered just a fraction longer than necessary before turning toward the aisles again. And when she walked away, I realized I was still staring at the spot she'd left behind, wondering what it was about her that made ordinary screws and steaming cups suddenly feel like the most electric things in the world. I couldn't stop thinking about the tilt of her head, the quiet confidence in her eyes, and the way, somehow, she had made me feel like I was both invisible and painfully seen at the same time. Even now, as I rest my hands on the counter, the warmth from the machine lingering, I know I'll remember that glance forever, and I'll probably spend the next few weeks trying to figure out what it really meant. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. The bookstore had a rhythm, predictable in its quiet, and yet she slipped back into it like an uninvited note in a familiar song. I was restocking a shelf of poetry collections when I heard the soft shuffle of her heels. "I think I broke another one," she said, holding up a small, battered lamp she'd been examining earlier. I looked up, and there it was again, the effortless command of her presence. She smiled faintly, but there was tension in her shoulders, a slight crease between her brows. Something about her seemed frayed, like a well-worn book whose spine had started to give way. "Let me see," I said, moving closer. My hands brushed against hers as I reached for the lamp, and I felt the tiniest shiver run up my arm. She didn't pull back, but she didn't relax either. We crouched beside the counter, examining the wiring. I tried not to stare, but I noticed the lines on her hands, the way her fingers flexed around the metal, strong but slightly trembling. Her laugh, when I made a dumb joke about soldering, was quiet, almost apologetic. It didn't fill the room the way I wanted it to. It sounded like a sound she rarely allowed herself to make. "Do you do this a lot?" she asked, voice softer now. There was a hesitation I hadn't heard before, a crack in the armor she wore so easily. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Mostly I break things first, then fix them." Her lips twitched, and I caught a flicker of something in her eyes, something she tried to hide. Exhaustion, maybe, or a trace of guilt. I wanted to ask, but I didn't. I just watched the small gestures she couldn't suppress. The way she tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The way her shoulders slumped a fraction when she realized the lamp wasn't as broken as she thought. "I guess I don't usually ask for help," she murmured. Her eyes darted away, scanning the room as if seeking an escape. I could feel the magnetic tension between us, the quiet charge of things unspoken. I wanted to say something to ease it, but the right words weren't there. So I did the only thing I could, kept my hands steady on the lamp, kept my voice calm, tried to make myself small enough not to scare her away but present enough that she might stay. Finally, she gave a breathless sigh, leaning just slightly closer than necessary. My heart kicked, because in that tiny move, so fleeting and unguarded, she'd let me in, even a little. And then she pulled back, shaking her head, brushing imaginary dust from her blouse. I should probably get back to browsing," she said, but her fingers lingered on the lamp's edge for a second longer than needed. I wanted to say something, anything, but I only nodded, words failing me. As she walked toward the aisles again, I found myself staring at her back, noticing the way she moved, the subtle tension in her gait, the way the light caught her hair. It was quiet, it was mundane, and yet it was charged in a way I couldn't name. And as she disappeared between the shelves, I realized I was already remembering the exact shade of her eyes in that fleeting moment, and wondering, hoping, she'd let me close enough again. The bookstore was nearly empty that evening, the last customers lingering by the magazines, their whispers swallowed by the rain tapping against the windows. The storm had started suddenly, fat drops drumming on the roof, making the lights flicker just enough to make the space feel private, fragile. I was shelving new arrivals when she appeared in the doorway, damp hair sticking slightly to her neck, her coat clutched to her chest. "You're still here," she said, half smiling, half exasperated. Her voice had that quiet resonance that made me want to listen longer than I should. "I didn't leave," I replied, trying to sound casual, though my chest was too tight. She came closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and I noticed the faint perfume she wore, warm, subtle, impossibly familiar. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was hold a stack of books a little too tightly, pretending to focus on them. We crouched near the poetry shelf again, this time sorting the new arrivals. Our knees brushed lightly under the counter, a touch so fleeting it should have meant nothing, but it didn't. I could feel the electricity in that near contact, the unspoken pull that neither of us named. "Do you ever get tired of this?" she asked suddenly, eyes on the books but voice softer, almost vulnerable. "The repetition, the routines?" I glanced at her, surprised. The question was ordinary, but her tone carried something else, an openness, a hesitation, a thread of doubt she didn't usually show. I wanted to answer honestly, to tell her how much I had noticed her, how much the sound of her laugh or the tilt of her head lingered in my mind, but I swallowed the words. "Sometimes," I said finally, "but mostly it's okay." Her eyes flicked to mine, searching, maybe expecting more. For a second, I thought she might step closer, lean just enough for us to cross some invisible line. I wanted her to, but I also wanted to retreat, terrified of what it would mean if she did. And then my phone buzzed, a sharp vibration against the counter. She glanced at it, and I realized it was her ex, maybe a friend, or someone from work. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the screen. The moment shattered, as if the storm outside had punctured the fragile bubble around us. "I should take this," she murmured, stepping back. Her shoulders stiffened, and the tension drained from the space between us. I wanted to say stay, but I didn't. I just nodded, my hands still clutching the books, feeling the empty space where her presence had been. As she moved toward the corner, I caught the faintest brush of her coat against mine. My heart leapt. knowing we had been a whisper away from something forbidden, something we both might have regretted. The door closed behind her, leaving the rain and the dim lights and my own racing thoughts. And yet, even as I stacked the final books, I couldn't stop replaying that brief stretch of proximity. The way our hands nearly touched, the pause that hung between us, the storm outside echoing the storm I felt inside. I knew, without needing to speak it aloud, that the memory of that moment would haunt me long after the rain stopped. It was late again, the store empty except for us and the hum of the fluorescent lights. I was stacking returned books when I heard her sigh behind me, a long, weary exhale that seemed to carry the weight of weeks. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't need to. I already knew she was standing there, quiet, unhurried, as if waiting for permission to exist in this small space with me. I don't know why I keep coming back, she said finally, her voice low, almost brittle. I froze mid-movement, gripping a stack of novels a little too tightly. My stomach flipped, but I didn't speak. I just let her words hang, thick in the air between us. She moved closer, but not close enough to touch. Just close enough that I could see the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes darted briefly to mine and then away, as if afraid I would read something too intimate, too dangerous. Everything feels wrong, she continued, whispering now. And yet I don't want to walk away. And I shouldn't want to. Her hands twisted at the edge of the counter, knuckles whitening. I swallowed, unsure whether to offer comfort or step back. I wanted both, and neither. My own chest felt tight, my pulse loud in the quiet store. I wanted to ask her what she meant, to name it, to make sense of it, but the words caught in my throat. Are we just pretending this is normal? She asked, and when she looked at me, the usual shield of confidence was gone. All that remained was vulnerability, raw and fragile. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make it better, but there was nothing. Instead, I moved a book a fraction closer to her on the counter and let my hands rest there, as if proximity could fill the space that words couldn't. She sighed again, leaning slightly against the counter, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond me. I keep thinking about it, she said. About us, or whatever this is. And I can't stop asking myself if it's stupid, or selfish, or worse. I stayed silent, listening to the tremor in her voice, the weight of things she couldn't, or wouldn't say. I noticed the fatigue in her eyes, the faint lines around them, and the way she bit her lower lip as if holding herself back from saying even more. God, she whispered finally, voice cracking. What are we doing? The words hit me like a hammer. Not the romantic kind of hammer, but the kind that exposes every quiet, guilty, unspoken thought you've tried to hide. I wanted to reach out, to steady her, to tell her she wasn't alone. But that would be crossing some invisible line we weren't ready to name. So I did nothing. Just stood there, feeling the electricity in the pause between us, the storm of emotions we couldn't articulate, and knowing that silence had said more than any words ever could. She stepped back then, taking a shuddering breath, and the distance felt like a wound. And just before she left the counter, she whispered so softly I barely heard it. I think I'm terrified of myself around you. And with that, she was gone, leaving only the faint echo of her words, and the impossible weight of them, hanging in the air. I found her in the cafe corner of the bookstore the next afternoon, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold. The storm from yesterday had cleared, leaving the sky bruised and gray. She looked smaller somehow, the armor she usually wore softened, frayed at the edges. I want to tell you something, she said, not looking at me at first. Her fingers traced the rim of the mug, twisting it in small, nervous circles. I sat opposite her, careful to give her space, but close enough that my presence was steady. Okay, I said. My voice sounded too calm, even to me. She swallowed hard. I lost someone. A long time ago. Someone I thought I'd spend my life with. Her eyes finally met mine, sharp, haunted, and I never really got over it. I've carried it around like a wound I can't show anyone. I felt my chest tighten. I didn't say anything immediately, just let her words settle between us. I noticed the subtle tremor in her hands, the slight hitch in her breath, the way her eyes darted away as if fearing my judgment. I wasn't ready for life to move on without him. I didn't know how, she whispered. There was a crack in her voice that made it impossible not to notice, impossible not to want to reach across the table and steady her. I remembered an old photograph she'd shown me briefly once, tucked into a book she returned months ago. I hadn't realized the weight it carried until now. I think I might know a little of that feeling, I said carefully. You never talked about him, but I saw the photo in that old book. The one you returned the month I started here. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she froze. You saw that? She asked softly, almost afraid. I did, I said. And I think I understand why some memories never really leave. You carry them quietly, even when no one's looking. She let out a long exhale, a mix of relief and disbelief. Her eyes glistened with something I couldn't name. Grief, maybe, or the faint hope of being understood. She leaned forward slightly, close enough that I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the way her lips pressed together to hold back more than just tears. I didn't expect anyone to notice, she said, voice trembling. Not like that. I didn't reach for her hand, though I wanted to. I just nodded, letting her vulnerability sit unbroken, unjudged, between us. There was a silence then, thick and intimate, carrying more weight than any conversation could. Finally, she spoke again, softer this time, almost to herself. It's like, every time I think I've put him behind me, I feel it all over again. And then, almost impossibly, she looked at me with something fragile and human, a quiet storm in her gaze. I think I've been waiting for someone to see me. All of me, even the parts one thought were lost. I stayed still, letting the words sink in. And in that moment, everything shifted. Nothing had changed outwardly, but inside, the air between us had condensed into something impossible to ignore. I realized then that nothing would ever feel the same again. It was late again. The store was quiet, the hum of the heater filling the spaces between us. She was perched on a low stool behind the counter, legs crossed, her coat discarded, sleeves rolled up. I sat opposite her, sorting the last of the returned books, but my hands weren't steady. They never were around her. She looked at me, and for the first time in weeks, there was no guard, no hesitation. Just a small, almost weary acknowledgement of what had been building between us. I don't know what to do with this, she said softly, voice low enough that it barely carried across the counter. I swallowed, trying to find words, but the truth was too simple. There was no dramatic confession, no sudden outburst. Just a quiet inevitability that had been simmering beneath the surface. Maybe we don't need to do anything. Just be here, I suggested. She tilted her head, studying me. Be here, she echoed, as if tasting the words, testing them for danger. Then she nodded slightly, a small, fragile gesture that felt like surrender and permission all at once. I moved a fraction closer, enough that our knees brushed under the counter. She didn't pull away. I noticed her hand, resting near mine on the wooden surface, fingers lightly brushing against the edge of my palm. My own hand twitched, unsure whether to close the distance or leave it as it was. We didn't speak for a long time. The silence wasn't empty. It was full of everything we hadn't said. The awkward glances, the stolen observations, the longing, the regret, the subtle obsession that had grown without notice. I could feel her heartbeat faintly, and it matched the quiet rhythm of my own. Finally, she shifted, letting her hand settle just slightly closer, brushing the back of mine with the lightest touch. That was all it took, an acknowledgement, a small bridge between two worlds that had been orbiting each other too closely to ignore. I've spent years thinking I'd lost everything I cared about, she whispered, almost to herself. I thought I'd made peace with it. I nodded, understanding. And maybe what we have doesn't undo the past. But it doesn't have to. She looked at me then, really looked, and for a moment, the bookstore, the rain, the quiet hum of lights, all of it fell away. There was only the two of us, sharing space, sharing breath, sharing that fragile, earned connection. She leaned forward, resting her forehead lightly against mine. No words, no declarations, just the small, intimate acknowledgement of understanding and presence. My hand moved of its own accord, brushing against hers, fingertips tracing a tentative path, grounding us both. We stayed like that, in silence, letting the unspoken settle. No promises, no rush, no perfection, just this fragile, real thing that had grown between us. And when we finally pulled back, our eyes met, calm and certain in a way neither of us had expected. I knew then, quietly, without needing to say it, nothing would ever be the same. It's been months since that quiet night in the bookstore when nothing dramatic happened, but everything changed. I can still remember the faint warmth of her hand against mine, the soft pressure of her forehead against mine, and the way silence somehow spoke louder than any words ever could. Looking back, I realize how much I've grown, or maybe how much I finally allowed myself to feel. I've learned that love doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or perfect timing. Sometimes it creeps in, quiet and unexpected, and it changes everything without announcing itself. She's changed too. The guarded confidence she carried so easily has softened into something warmer, something more human. She still moves with that effortless presence, but now there's laughter at the edges, and a vulnerability she lets show, carefully, selectively. The walls she built weren't broken. They were gently lowered, and I was lucky enough to see her through the cracks. Our connection isn't perfect. We don't need it to be. We still have moments of hesitation, moments where the weight of our past creeps in, moments where the world reminds us that reality is never as simple as we'd like. But now, there's trust. There's patience. There's the quiet certainty that when we share space, even without words, we understand each other. I think about the small things most often. The way she smiles at a book title she loves, the careful tilt of her head when she's listening, the almost imperceptible exhale when she feels safe enough to pause. And I notice myself in ways I never noticed before. How I've slowed down, how I linger in moments instead of rushing past them, how I've learned that being present is sometimes the most radical act of love. There were no fireworks, no sweeping declarations, no cinematic confessions. There was only the slow, quiet collapse of distance, the soft alignment of two lives that had been orbiting too close for too long. That's enough. It's more than enough. Sometimes I catch her looking at me, and we share a brief smile, almost conspiratorial, almost tender. And in that fleeting connection, I feel the story we've written together, the near misses, the pauses, the careful honesty, the quiet courage it took to finally be seen, and I know it will stay with us. Always. Love, it turns out, isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just this, shared silence, small touches, unspoken understanding, and the sense that someone sees you completely, even when you're too scared to show all of yourself. And as I close the store for the evening, the light fading over the quiet streets outside, I realize that everything I felt, every hesitation, every glance, every almost touch, was worth it. Because what we have isn't perfect, but it's real. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?